Of the many revelations we got from the Union Cross finale, one in particular that has been on my mind is what the Master revealed to Luciu about the Foretellers' true purpose, and how they were raised and trained so they could be the perfect vessels for the 7 deadly darknesses. But just how much further is he willing to sacrifice in order to end the darkness? After all that's been done in the Age of Fairy Tales, and all that we know will be done in the times that come after, what must be done next? Will the Master be willing to not only sacrifice others, but perhaps even himself in order to ensure the death of the darkness? The Master has made it clear a number of times now that his plan is to destroy the darkness, but because they are formless, it's impossible to defeat them. However, if the vessels are needed so that darkness can be destroyed, will that mean that the Foretellers will be sacrificed in order for that to be achieved? Does the Master have a darkness stored inside himself, and if he does that mean he will be willing to destroy himself in order to completely eradicate the darkness? Ever since the Master mentioned the war between light and dark that occurred when he was a boy, it was clear that this was a personal matter to him, but now we have heard directly from him about the loss that he suffered in the struggle against this old foe and friend. And if what he's saying is true, and he's also set up the Foretellers to harbour the darkness, I guess the only question now is, what is his intentions with that? How exactly does he intend to get rid of the darkness once it's inside these vessels? Well, based on what he says, the vessels exist to give form to the darkness so that they can be defeated, and what I've been unclear on is whether or not the darkness has already taken root inside the Foretellers, or if that's still yet to happen. Now, given the fact that we don't ever see these 7 deadly darknesses like how we see the other ones, I would assume that they are inside the Foretellers already. However, another thing that this clearly explains is their names. It's actually quite obvious now in retrospect, considering what Master Odin said about the darkness in Dark Road. Hermod asks, so one's darkness is born from their innate qualities? To which he answers, for some, yes. And then when asked about how does darkness manifest in people, he answers that it comes from negative emotions such as greed, ire, or envy. And the Master said in the finale that negative emotions are a prime nesting ground for darkness. And remember, the one character that we know has been calling themselves darkness from the beginning has negativity closely associated with him, leading to the birth of the unversed. And no matter how much you defeat them,
their negativity flows right back into me.
Now, with what we know, it is very apparent that this whole point about darkness coming from negative emotions is not only true, but quite literally it's reflected in the Foretellers just by their names being based on the 7 deadly sins. And as the Master himself says, there are 7 particularly deadly ones. Now, this line about 7 deadly ones isn't the official translation, but given the context here, I think it's likely that it's not far off. And personally, I think calling them the 7 deadly darknesses is more than fitting anyway. And remember, the Master is the one who gave the Foretellers their new names, as told to us in key as well as in back cover. And those names were of course the ones we all know, the ones based on the 7 deadly sins. And as he says, the idea of the traitor, the war, it all serves the purpose of fostering this darkness in all of the Foretellers at the same time, so that when they clash, it only amplifies those negative emotions, meaning the darkness is rooted inside them will be the 7 strongest ones. But because of his teachings, the Foretellers will be prepared to hold those darknesses within them without it controlling them, like what would happen with the Union leaders, meaning they can hold it within themselves until the intended moment when the darkness inside them can be destroyed. And this of course plays into why the pieces on the chessboard are black pieces representing the darkness. But this is where I begin to wonder, what exactly does the Master intend to do with these vessels? Now, a dark option, and perhaps the most dramatic, would be that he is going to try and destroy them or place them in positions to be destroyed. You'd think that's what the Keyblade War was for though, but the Foretellers all survived it, and now they are in the present day seemingly still ready and willing to serve the Master. So did he put them through all of that and have them survive the war just so he could kill them off personally later on? Somehow that seems a bit too contrived and also kind of a bit too predictable, and whilst I do believe the Master is certainly the antagonist of the saga, I still can't see him doing the Foretellers that dirty. I mean, he has done them pretty dirty to be fair, but is he really going to be so roundabout about it? Perhaps. The Master says he's not planning on sacrificing anyone, he's preparing ways to save them. At this time when he told Luxu this, there was still peace in Daybreak Town, but clearly given what followed with all the chaos, the war, and what was effectively the end of the world, I'm not sure if he's just lying or not, but regardless of whether or not he planned to sacrifice anyone, that's pretty much what ended up happening. And even if he's not lying, when he says he plans on saving humanity, he may have a very warped idea of how he plans on doing that, just like how Xehanort wanted to reset everything to wipe the slate clean, because in his mind, that was saving everything. So perhaps the Master has a similar type of idea. And personally, I think that's perhaps the most likely outcome if he really is a true antagonist. However, let's be fair and let's take him at his word. Let's say he really didn't intend to sacrifice anyone, but instead, like he says, he is preparing to save them. Well, how exactly would setting the Foretellers and the Union leaders up as vessels accomplish that if he also plans on destroying the darkness? Well, perhaps he plans on extracting that darkness in the same way like how Xehanort did with Ventus, and so then the darknesses would become a willful darkness that possesses its own form independent of anyone else. So like how Vanitas can exist with his own body, leaving Ventus to have his own body as a pure light. Also, because Vanitas is a willful darkness, I would assume that's why he has his own name and doesn't speak as though he's part of the collective and says I rather than we. So if this is the type of physical form the Master is referring to, then perhaps rather than destroy the Foretellers, he simply needs them to act as containers for the darkness long enough until he can extract them, making them into distinct willful darknesses, and then he can destroy them. But if the Master is not planning on sacrificing the Foretellers in order to destroy the darkness, then what about himself? Is he ready and willing to sacrifice himself and the Foretellers if necessary to destroy the darkness? Something tells me he is. However, if his plan is to just simply extract it so that it possesses its own willful form, I suppose then he might not need to sacrifice himself in order to destroy the darkness harboring inside him, if again he really does have a darkness inside of himself. One thing I think would be interesting to think about though, if this is the case, is what these willful darknesses will end up looking like. Vanitas, for example, looks like a dark Sora, but I wonder what the Foretellers, if they had a willful darkness manifest itself in the same way Vanitas was manifested, then what on earth would their darknesses look like? I mean, might be hard to answer because we don't even know what they look like. But that's something that I think might be worth thinking about as well. And one thing I've always found interesting about Vanitas is how his name is the Latin word for vanity, which is synonymous with pride, which is of course the sin we often assume the Master would be associated with. It makes me wonder if Vanitas is actually one of the 7 deadly darknesses, because based on the Master's words, he shouldn't be. But what if he's the darkness that's actually associated with pride and the Master has no darkness of his own? If that's not the case, then I guess the other 6 darknesses could possibly just have names associated with them that may also be synonyms of the 7 sins. But Xehanort was the one to give Vanitas his name, so I wonder if that name choice was inspired by the names of the Foretellers, especially since Xehanort most likely would have quite a lot of knowledge, not only just about darkness, but perhaps the dark entities that existed. And again, if the Foretellers' names are related to those dark entities, then if Xehanort knew that, that may be why he specifically chose a name like Vanitas. That aside though, something that I have to bring up is how exactly does unreality play into all of this? The Master says that he wants to go to a place where darkness can't go, a place of neither light nor darkness, but yet he also claims he plans on destroying the darkness. So how exactly does unreality play into that if it's meant to be a place where there is no darkness? Is he going to bring darkness there so it can be more easily destroyed or something? Is Sora related to all of this? Yuzora, the Nameless Star, the True Dandelion? Perhaps it's got some relation to Kingdom Hearts. And I also wonder, how will the Foretellers react to this truth? Luxu certainly didn't take to it too well, and Ava didn't even learn about all of this, but from what she did learn, she didn't take too well to the Master's plans either. It makes me also wonder, how do all the Guardians fit into this as well? As I've said before, characters with a history of falling to darkness such as the Wayfinder trio and Riku may become essential in this upcoming conflict, but how darkness is perceived by the protagonist may be flipped, and rather than trying to defeat the darkness, we may see our protagonist eventually becoming its defenders in order to protect the balance. When it comes to the Master's plans, there's a lot of questions to think about, but one thing I'm wondering is, if the Master manages to achieve all of this, how will this affect the universe of Kingdom Hearts? If darkness itself, one half of the balance, is removed, what will be the consequences of that? And is it something that the Master cares for? Just what exactly could be the cost of the death of darkness. In my next video, I'll be discussing these revelations about the darkness even further, and this time we'll be taking a closer look at Dark Road, because I think there's a darkness-filled tragedy just waiting to happen. Thank you very much for listening to this entire video. Please be sure to leave a like and of course share your thoughts in the comments below. Anyway, my name is NextGenNovelist and that's all I've got to say, and I'm out. Peace.